The Four-Storey Lingham, a short story. The narrator encounters a burnt-out municipal worker. One fiercely independent Tuesday, I was somewhat surprised to meet young Jasper Thornby, looking stranded and empty outside the laundromat of Promise. Young Jasper, I relayed, and then policed his whereabouts. Not working today? Because I knew that this young Jasper ordinarily is working at the Municipal Hall, the Hall of Splendour, where ordinarily he rubber stamps building approvals. He rubber stamped the approval for my kitchen extension. He was not, however, looking very rubbery this Tuesday. Gaunt and ill-disposed, he seemed like a man who had been through the doona dryer, I was thinking. In fact, noting his unstable symptomhood, he looked like a man who had only recently survived trench warfare. His eyes were plasticine, and he was indubitably twitchy. He was not one of my patients, not yet, but as a trained professional I could see that he was thoroughly ragged. Coming back scattergunned, he eventually said to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was far away," and then added, "It's the smell of the curry." As for why he was not rubbering building approvals that day, he offered no immediate explanation. The curry had him in a flashback. The curry he had in mind was the wafting scent of sharp and exotic subcontinental spices looming on the street, of which he made my nostrils newly aware. It was coming from the Restaurant of Deliverance, just up from the Laundromat of Promise. It was next to the Tax Agent of Wonder. "You're looking a tad frazzled," I offered as a word of concern. Jasper took a deep gulp of the curry-scented air, looked left and right as if he was being tracked by Mossad, and admitted, "I haven't been well." The ill-disposed often loiter out the front of the Laundromat of Promise, I noted. "Nothing serious, I hope," I said. "Just stress," he said. "It must be of a personal form, I'm thinking, because there is nothing stressful about rubber stamping building approvals. When he approved my kitchen extension, it was altogether leisurely. I took in the paperwork, Jasper smiled, chatted aimlessly about the rain, and then blithely and without fuss rubberised my application, no further tension imposed. He was a man with a darling job. Penalty rates and 6 weeks annual leave, they say, when you work in the Hall of Splendour. I notified him of my qualifications. "I have a PhD in stress," I said. But what was the cause of his particular bedragglement? I assessed him on the spot. He had had a nervous breakthrough. But what was the wall he had smashed his head against? It turns out it was work-related after all. He was on unpaid leave. He revealed that his pension fund was nursing him along. "If you'd like to talk about it, Jasper," I offered, happy to milk his pension fund for some regular sessions. Everybody knows that talk therapy doesn't really work, but it's profitable and sometimes entertaining, and it helps people think their misery is unique. I had my office in the Clinic of Fortitude, just down the road, next to the Bank of Glory. I had some openings in my appointment book. "Tell me where it all began," I said, soothingly, when frazzled Jasper took me up on the offer and the pension fund came to the party. I'm thinking back to that fiercely independent Tuesday outside the Laundromat of Promise. There was Jasper, a tardy nugget. The smell of curry gripped him in a holding pattern, I had observed. He related that one day, happily rubberising permits, an application fell upon his desk that at first wanted to be waved along but then arrested his attention. The application had the usual twaddle in legalese and an artist's impression with expensive drawings. Jasper's stamping hand was set to go, and then he looked again. The application, he said, was from the Ladies' Auxiliary of the Indian Advancement League, under the name of Mrs. Gupta. The problem was delicate from the outset. The auxiliary had submitted an application to build a 4-storey Lingham in a mixed residential zone on a well-serviced block of land with adequate parking. It was to be Jasper explained, in honour of Lord Shiva. Talk therapy is a bonus. The patient does all the work. The therapist sits there and doodles crocodiles on a notepad. And although this proposed structure might make a fine monument to Lord Shiva, Jasper ambled on, it was nevertheless a Lingham, and it was nevertheless, well, ostentatious. I can't approve this, he thought to himself. It's clearly visible from the kindergarten only 3 streets away. He meant the kindergarten of perfection. Think of the kiddies. Falling back on my training, I sensed something Freudian here and ventured, and this Lingham, what did it look like? What do you think it looked like? Said frazzled Jasper. He assumed I knew what a Lingham looked like. If you are at all familiar with the word Lingham, then you know what one looks like. I could see that his neurons had sailed on the Titanic and that his eyes were jangly mists, his fingers overly given to fiddling. This could take quite a few sessions, I am thinking. 4 stories, I say. Huge, he assured me. He rejected the application. You what? I said, alarmed. But wasn't he paid well to rubber stamp it? Was it not within the code? Technically, he said, but you can't build a huge phallus in the middle of suburbia, can you? Huge phallus, I repeated, taking notes. The structure at issue, the Shiva Lingham, was a devotional device, and the ladies of the Ladies Auxiliary of the Indian Advancement League were keen. They'd raised the money from Laddu drives. Mrs. Gupta was a local businesswoman. She ran a travel agent, the Travel Agent of Redemption, just up from the Barber of Majesty, and was a Hindu with a red dot to prove it. She was a sitting member, moreover, in an interreligious love-in with several lapsed Anglicans. She led tours to Varanasi on the Ganga. The Lord Shiva, readers should probably know, is represented in long-standing metaphors by stone pillars, vertically inclined, and down the bottom is Lady Shakti's yoni, receptive. It is primordial, even when it's stylised. The German wizard Charles Young, the wayward son of Freud, had a lot to say about it. The sanctity of the Lingham is not to be gainsaid, of course, but young Jasper took another look at the artist's impressions of the proposed monolith, sticking up, rude and blatant, and his cultural backgrounds made him overlook it. You can't erect something like that only 3 streets from a kindergarten, was his assessment. Erect, I repeated, taking more notes. It was then, as they say, that the cowpat landed in the dal. It was suggested that Jasper had been insensitive. Mrs. Gupta and 3 other Hindu ladies made an appointment to intimidate him with Vedic citations. He suggested smaller versions, less explicit and perhaps not 4 stories tall. But, Mrs. Gupta had said, demanding stark equality, the Pope-loving Catholics build their pointy churches to tower through the skyline. And, one of the other ladies complained, they gather around on Sundays to eat Jesus. Young Jasper was out of his depth. He tried to be persuasive. He explained that to all intents and purposes the proposed edifice looked like a giant penis, and he couldn't put his rubber on it. This caused conniptions. The Indian ladies couldn't see it. It's a Shiva Lingham. How dare you, they protested. Yes, but, Jasper pleaded, it is, well, phallic-shaped, and I'm afraid there are... He trailed off, ineffective. The ladies consulted amongst themselves. What did he mean, phallic-shaped? They had never noticed before, Jasper said to me, still gobsmacked about it. It had shaken him up. Why was he the one that had to point it out to them? They were scandalised, and that afternoon reported him to his area manager, Cheryl. What did Cheryl say? I wondered. She went into blue overdrive, he said. I'd seen area managers in blue overdrive. It wasn't pretty. But why such a reaction, I wondered. Cheryl was astute. Please God, no, she was thinking immediately. Not a multicultural controversy. It could be the kiss of death to her career. It then unfolded. One of the elected councillors, Ginger Nichols, a nationalist, caught the curry-scented winds of it and raised alarm. Now the bloody Indians want to build a big dick in our city, was the sort of thing he was saying. In a short while, the Indian ambassador became involved, and the attaché for cultural affairs, and the secretary for community dialogue, and the ombudsman's office, and the newly appointed discrimination task force, and the union. And then the gay community took an interest. A pylon, I said, summing it up. That explained frazzled Jasper's crushed disposition, and why he was haunted by the curry wafts from the restaurant of deliverance, which ordinarily would make a grown man salivate as he waited for his laundry. Think of a man at the bottom of a squirming heap of righteousness. By another analogy, the poor sod had wandered into a political minefield. I saw the dimensions of his impasse. It would definitely require a few sessions. Have you ever read the Upanishads? He asked me. No, I said. Neither have I, he said, but apparently it's all in there. I decided to be usefully cosmopolitan about it. The petrodollar mosque near my place that had been rubber stamped, I told him, was only a nuisance on Fridays. Did Cheryl not uphold his executive decision? Did his area manager not stand up to support him? Had she ever even seen a 4-storey Lingham? They suspended his accounts and his login codes. He became the bland white male. His checkered shirts made him Eurocentric. It was, at very least, a microaggression, probably homophobic too. I could see it, the nasty little racist homophobe. He was the easygoing scapegoat in the sordid mixture. The whole Hall of Splendour issued a big puja and said sorry, and Mrs. Gupta and the Ladies' Auxiliary agreed to curtail the symbolism a bit. Lord Shiva would be just as happy with the lesser abode after all. Ginger Nichols and the frothing nationalist fell flaccid. Jasper would be put on indefinite leave without pay, just to teach him a lesson. They managed to keep it out of the newspapers. At that point, Jasper lost his job. He sat lonely in the coffee shop of fulfilment. His worldview did a nosedive. He became haphazard about breakfast. It was at that point, he related to me, his neurons struck the iceberg and he started sinking. He looked just like a guy I'd treated who'd been run over by an Abrams tank in southern Lebanon. PSTD, I diagnosed. Don't you mean PTSD? He puzzled. Post-stress trauma disorder, I said, spelling it out. Post-trauma stress disorder, said he. Whatever, I said, and told him he had a bad case of it. He was, as he said, just a man trying to do his job, and as a man, he knew a phallic object when he saw one. Cheryl had described him as unenlightened. His particular mode of burnout was caused by systems failure, I assessed. He might think he is happily rubberising building applications all day long, but he is just one cog in a complex network of virtue signals he didn't understand. You, Jasper, I told him, were an accident waiting to happen. And as it happens, it happened. He one day ran into an application he couldn't swallow. The Hindus were not to blame. They had piously aspired to the biggest Lingham in the southern hemisphere, but the vision was lost in translation when it reached Jasper's desk. They were stiff in their resistance. They were prepared to go all the way to the Planning Review Tribunal. Then they gaslighted him, he added. All his fellow workers looked over the application and said, I can't see any phallic objects, can you? You've got a problem, Jasper. It was, he insisted to me, as knobby as you please, and 4 stories tall. Its dimensions were within regulation, perhaps. It was the shape that was the problem, and its big domed termination. But you understand, I asked him, that it's the outward symbol of the formless reality. There was no basis in any bylaw to reject an application just because a municipal officer didn't understand pure consciousness, I was sure. The misunderstanding, he wanted to say, was on the part of Mrs. Gupta and the Ladies' Auxiliary. Nobody thinks twice about it in Varanasi-on-the-Ganga, but in the context of the secular suburbs among Australian horizontality, just 3 streets from the kindergarten, it had no emblemhood and would arouse unwanted attention. If nothing else, the whole municipality, he feared, would become the subject of dick jokes. I could see how he got himself into trouble. He was a proficient rubber stamper, but young Jasper had a literal attitude. "And how do you feel about dick jokes?" I asked him, seeing an inquiry to explore. Frazzled Jasper said he felt a worthless being these days. He had a darling job. Then one day it all went to custard, all because his stamping hand hesitated when it thought it spotted an organ of generation, was how he saw it. "You can't build a huge phallus in the middle of suburbia, can you?" he said again. "A huge Shiva Lingham," I said. "There's a difference." And all the hoo-ha existed within the difference. That was the upshot of the case. He'd seen a solicitor, of course, at McLean and Associates, solicitors of loveliness, but they told him he should be thankful he wasn't in jail. He twitched. His processing department struggled with the inner overload. 4 stories, I said again. "Huge," he reiterated. "Bigger," he said, "than the Big Banana in Queensland." The dimensions of it were clear, but so too was the sorry state of Jasper's nervous apparatus. "Cormophobia," I added. He looked at me. "It's a thing," I said. "The unnatural fear of curries." "Mrs. Gupta is famous for her vindaloo, apparently," he reported. "I bet she is," I said. Curry wafts would give him the trigger. He revisited the traumatic afternoon. I explained to him the patriarchal basis of his physiological assumptions. Then I tried to catch his reflex when it wasn't looking. "What's the first thing that comes into your mind," I say, "when I say the words rocket ship?" In the end, my assessment was that he'd probably need a full course of treatment, 6 months or longer. He was in a good pension fund. The workers at the Hall of Splendour have a good pension fund. I saw him next on a decidedly tidy Friday. He was heading down to the hardware store of mystery. From his gait I could tell he was feeling somewhat sturdy again. "Young Jasper," I apprised. He told me he was off to buy a spigot. I was well aware that he had fudged my kitchen extension application. Where was the wheelchair ramp? But that is the art of rubber stamping. He might have rubber stamped Mrs. Gupta's proposal too, and still been usefully employed, if he wasn't a young man with hang-ups. As a trained professional, I could see that he still had a long way to go. I knew he was making real progress, though, when he said he had enrolled in yoga. "Apparently," he said, explaining the concept, "you can keep yourself fit and in top condition without jogging." "Crazy," I agreed. Lord Shiva and Lady Shakti had a his and hers version too, apparently. We walked past the grocery store of magnificence. The Friday, as I say, was decidedly tidy, and I didn't want to leave any lingering ends. I decided to be nosy. "So what's with the spigot?" I wondered as we approached the hardware store of mystery. He looked around, left and right, for any Mossad agents. "Don't tell anyone," he says. "I'm building a kitchen extension." I had, of course, advised my well-pensioned patient to keep himself busy in the meantime, and not to languish outside the laundromat of promise being triggered by the smell of tikka masala anymore. "Take up a hobby," I had told him. "Read the Upanishads or something." I had heard they were substantial. Better still, that old fallback for the frazzled, home renovations. Has your application been approved? I asked him cheekily. I rubberised it myself, he smiled. Good for you, Jasper, I said. Good for you.